So for any of you that have read this book, New Eyes, in it I make the reference to the need for a new political party, at least in the United States at some point. I refer to it as the Unity Consciousness Party. It's shooting pretty high. Hopefully one day somebody could pull that off. I nominate you, Dex. You'd be a good president of the Unity Consciousness Party. I do not want that job. Anyhow, that party looks like, unifying people through concepts and ideas that are available to us all right now, but aren't exactly politically expedient. What made me think of that is a study that just got released just yesterday. It was a study done by Ivy League researchers. And let me just read a little bit of it to you. U.S. political polarization may have reached an irreversible tipping point. As political polarization continues in the United States, a study proposed by Ivy League sociologists suggests that the nation may be spiraling towards a point of no return. The study, led by Cornell professor Michael Macy, claims to have identified a tipping point beyond which the divide between Democrats and Republicans will become irreversible. The study, titled Polarization and Tipping Points, was published Wednesday in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The researchers' model shows that the role of party, identity, and levels of intolerance for disagreement have on ideological extremism and partisan divides. Quote, "We found that polarization increases incrementally only up to a point. Above this point, there's a sudden change in the very fabric of the institution, like the change of water to steam when the temperature exceeds the boiling point." Macy then pointed to divergent attitudes in America over a pandemic, global warming as prime examples. Quote, "Instead of uniting against a common threat," says Macy, "the threat itself becomes yet another polarizing issue." So what Macy and colleagues are talking about is political issues that we've become polarized on. And that idea then becomes polarizing in itself, and the threat, destroys us all. Now I'm going to suggest in the Unity Consciousness Party that there's a non-political issue that's our common threat. And unless we band together to fight it, it is going to consume us all. What is that? It's the human ego. The very idea of feeling polarized in the first place. The very idea of there being a divide, period. That's the threat. It's an existential one, and it's the only threat that's relevant. What we have is a bunch of people debating various physical world issues like global warming and pandemic and all of that, and a whole lot of people have reached a tipping point because they're so convicted of their perspective and their point of view. Right? They're positive that their way is the only way, and you must be an idiot unless you see it that way. Well, this leads to thousands of years of great philosophy, which I want to link to and emphasize something called the Perennial philosophy. It's a concept that's been out for a long time about the idea that all philosophies have a shared common truth. All philosophies end up pointing to the same thing. We all eventually get to this too. And the reason why it's important is because this is the only way we're going to beat that one common enemy. Good luck agreeing on stuff like global warming and the pandemic. We're highly unlikely to do that. In fact, we're getting to the point where the tipping point has been reached. Once the water turns into the steam, boom, it's no longer boiling water. It could be something else. This country could fall apart soon. We're clearly on the verge of it. But would you like to be a person that's part of the solution or part of the divide? Well, here's the answer, and it's found in the Perennial philosophy. Now again, some people will not like the words, so I'm going to use a phrase that's very simple to understand, and it's my experience in 20 years as a mental health professional. That common philosophy that's going to beat the common enemy called the ego is optimized mental health, which is improving this mind and making it work in peak performance, right? Not settling for low-grade mental states or emotional states, rising the mind up to the highest state possible. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Hermes, which is a Greek-Egyptian prophet, goes back thousands of years, and a lot of his teachings you'll see very resonant with Jesus and Krishna, Buddha, Muhammad, all the various philosophers. They all point to the same thing, where that's what this channel is dedicated towards. And Hermes says that God's mind is the goal. God's mind is the reward. That all of us have the ability to aspire towards God's mind. However, he says that those who do so are considered mad by the ignorant masses. That whenever you get to a point where you're like, well, I don't really want to do this polarization game anymore. I don't like the stress that's happening to me. I don't like the fact our country's falling apart. I want to be a uniter, not a divider. The next president to say that and actually mean it will be the first one. All presidents say, I'm going to unite this country, and then they dive into their political partisan politics, right? Well, the only way we're going to actually ever unify it is rallying around a certain point. And this is the only point. It's the way the universe got set up. We have to aspire to God's mind. And again, that can mean a lot of different things, and if that offends you, then just flip to the concept of optimized mental health. Here's what it looks like simply. God, says Hermes, offers his mind to us, like it's in a bowl of soup. Here you go, take it. But man, he says, man has the power to ascend into heaven, yet he crawls on his belly through the dust. See, all of us are being offered God's mind. You're allowed to think like God, isn't that cool? It's also known as Christ consciousness or Buddha nature. All of us have that ability. And yet we choose to crawl in the dirt like a serpent because we're so addicted to the ego. Either we can fill ourselves with God's mind, or we can leave it empty. Filling yourself with God's mind is known as the light. Not doing so is known as the darkness. It's actually very simple. And there are very specific unifying ideas that help us do this. Buying into political ideas that are clearly separated types of ideas is going to lead to the divide and the polarization and eventually the destruction of America. But if we could unite around an idea that's not polarizing, that each one of us can ascend to this level of understanding, we can take on God's mind or elite mental health. If we could do that, then we can actually unite. We can still agree to disagree, still vote for your causes, but we do so on a much separate, higher level. Hermes teaches that the purpose of life is to come to know God. And in order to do so, we must be like God. In Kabbalah, they call this the equivalence of form. In order to be like God, I must resonate with God. Being like God doesn't mean physical features. Who among us has physical features that are like God? It doesn't make any sense. But God, as it says in the Bible, is love. And what we can do is resonate on the level of love, high-level love. That's also optimum mental health. What does that look like? It looks like being forgiving and kind and compassionate and wise and understanding and all these various qualities that we all know is elite mental health. Resentment, fear, shame, guilt, doubt, all of that, not elite mental health. It leads to all the problems. In this culture, we're addicted to resentment. Well, let's just crawl in our bellies like serpents then, right? Because it doesn't work, right? If you're just so interested in winning your political argument, you're not ascending to the level of God. But notice how people on both sides of the political aisle can choose to do this. It doesn't matter what your perspective is. You can ascend to the level of God's mind. Obviously not physical, must be done energetically. I often think of music as a perfect example for this. If I'm trying to play any musical instrument and I'm just learning how to do it, somebody lays out for me, the music sheet, and I'm supposed to play, say I'm playing the piano, F sharp, is that a thing? So if I'm playing the piano and I want to hit F sharp, guess what? F sharp is resonant on every piano in the world if it's tuned correctly, and I'm supposed to play that note. And I'm trying to match what's on the music sheet. Well, God is just love. God is elite mental health. God is Christ consciousness. And if I can ascend to that level, I'm partaking in God's mind. This is available to us all. And if you partake in it and I partake in it, we're tasting the same thing. There's no difference of opinion. It's literally, doesn't that taste sweet? Sadhguru calls it sweetness. Ooh. I agree with you on that. That tastes good. I love forgiveness. It feels so good. I love courage. I love fearlessness. Who disagrees with that? Now, we have all these political games that we're playing, but if we overlay onto it the higher level game of ascending to God's mind, now we've got it for real. So here's how Hermes teaches to do this. He says, to do this, we must imagine ourselves in all places at all times. We must embrace all opposites. Now this reminds me of the American Indian saying that you should not judge a man unless you've walked 2 moons in his moccasins, okay? We are living in a country where so many people are convicted of their perspective, but they've not walked in the other person's shoes. When Hermes says that we must imagine ourselves in all places at all times, he's just talking about omniscience. God's also omnipotent, everywhere at all times, and can see all things. This is what we have to do when we take ourselves out of our ego perspective and plop ourselves into somebody else's shoes. Think of how blacks and whites are doing that in this country. Or men and women. or straight and gay, and tall and short and fat and thin, and Steelers and Patriots and Ravens, all these separate ideas that we have. How often do we put ourselves in the other person's shoes? And if you've put yourself in someone else's shoes and you think you're coming from their perspective and you can understand it now, then you have to put yourself in the shoes of the person who's not doing that. See, it's not just the perspectives of people you agree with or that you're trying to be like. You also have to put yourselves in the shoes of people you disagree with and try to think, why do they think like that? Where do they come from? Do they get to a place in their development where they can disagree with me so much and be so angry about it? What's that about, right? And do they have any clue that there's this game going on, that we can ascend to the level of Christ consciousness or God's mind? Are they playing that game? You can pretty much tell if somebody's playing that game based upon how peaceful they are if you throw them a softball question like, what do you think of vaccine mandates? What do you think of global warming? Who should you vote for? Who should you root for? Right? Throw that out to anyone. Here's your litmus test. And if they say the Buddha line, it does not further, because Buddha was working on finding his true self, Buddha nature. He wasn't interested in those political debates. He wanted to unify through certain spiritual concepts. And Jesus said to Peter, you're focusing on the affairs of man, not on the affairs of God. Jesus wouldn't have been political. I'm so sick of the political parties trying to co-opt his teachings and making it political, but he certainly wouldn't have been. He emphasized faith, justice, and mercy. He emphasized the fruits of the Spirit, not judging other people for their behaviors, on either side of the political aisle, on every debate. As he teaches, what good is it to gain the whole world and lose your soul? I would much rather work towards God's mind than winning political debates. Now again, Hermes says, and you're going to be considered mad when you try that. Have at it, call me mad. I want to be part of a unity party, something that actually brings people together, and it's not going to happen on political issues. So in the end, it's good mental health. Okay? The fact is, rising to the level of Christ consciousness, optimal mind, is to be able to play the virtues and do them very correctly. You then partake in the sweetness. Muhammad teaches that there's no compulsion in religion because truth stands out clear from error. It's obvious when you've done it. Hermes then says that opinions are irrelevant. Hermes says that opinion is only a dim reflection of knowledge, but knowledge is a direct experience of truth. That's the idea. When you've tasted truth, it's no longer an opinion. You know that it's true. This is also gnosis. Once you know something is true, who needs to argue anymore? You can let people play their political games, and you wouldn't feel the need to argue with them. You'd peacefully sit by, like the Tao says, and not need to speak. Okay? So you have a choice, all of us do. Which game do you want to play? Physical world arguing game? The United States has gotten to the tipping point. We can barely go any further. The next step is to go into consciousness. The next step is to go into spiritual development. That's where we're going to find the unity.